Life is full of unforeseen events, and today, I am going to relate a touching story from Eastern Europe, more precisely from Romania, that took place several years ago, in the warm beginnings of July 2006. As the summer holidays unfolded, Eleonora Marder made a heartfelt commitment to her grandchildren. She promised them that if they excelled in their schoolwork, she would take them to a destination they had long dreamed of visiting, despite the various hardships life presented. Eleonora was a beacon of resilience, managing her household and tirelessly working in the fields to ensure her grandchildren had everything they required. At times, her efforts even involved engaging in strenuous agricultural work to scrape together enough money for better days ahead. A tragic event had struck the family 4 years earlier when Eleonora lost her daughter and son-in-law in a horrific accident. The couple had escaped to a secluded cabin to celebrate another year of their union. The evening was joyful, marked by a sumptuous dinner prepared by the wife, accompanied by perhaps a few too many drinks. Tragically, they fell asleep, oblivious to a fire ignited by the lit candles, which rapidly engulfed the cabin. Both succumbed to smoke inhalation in a heart-wrenching incident that deeply affected the entire family. Since that dreadful night, Eleonora had become the sole guardian of her grandchildren, Anna and Sebastian, who were just 6 and 3 years old respectively at the time of their parents' demise. As time marched on, the sharp pains of loss gradually began to mend. When the time for the promised vacation arrived, Eleonora, after meticulously packing their suitcases, escorted her grandchildren to the train station. After a long journey, they arrived at their coastal destination, where the children reveled in the sunshine and ocean waves. The 2-week vacation passed in a blink, and soon it was time to return to their modest dwelling in the eastern part of the country. Financial struggles continued to afflict the family. They lived in a rented home, and the funds left by the children's father had mysteriously vanished from his bank accounts, despite him having recently inherited a substantial amount from his own father. Additionally, the family faced debts due to damages to the cabin, forcing Eleonora to sell her car. Unfortunately, even this drastic measure was insufficient to resolve all their financial burdens. As the children matured, Eleonora realized that the enigma of the missing funds would need to be confronted eventually. She decided to wait until Anna and Sebastian were mature enough to either investigate the disappearance themselves or to understand the complexities surrounding it. She hoped that with time and maturity, they could face this challenge together and possibly recover what was rightfully theirs. This narrative unfolds in a quaint, remote village nestled in the heart of Romania, illustrating the profound resilience and boundless love of a grandmother named Eleanor who courageously navigated life's harsh challenges for the benefit of her grandchildren's future. Eleanor, a widow barely making ends meet on a meager pension, devotedly raised her grandchildren. As their vacation drew to a close, she decided to give them a memorable day out at one of the busiest local beaches. A new adventure for the children. On this sun-kissed day at the beach, her grandchildren, Sebastian and his sister, were ecstatic, frolicking near the water's edge. They engaged in the joyous task of building an elaborate sandcastle. Amidst their laughter, a startling discovery by Sebastian's sister abruptly changed the mood. With eyes wide in astonishment, she sprinted to her grandmother, breathlessly exclaiming, "Grandma, Grandma, look, it's Mom and Dad." As she pointed towards a young couple nearby, Eleanor, visibly shaken, turned to see where her granddaughter was pointing and nearly lost her balance in shock. There, unmistakably, was her daughter, although her son-in-law seemed somewhat altered. Struck by a torrent of emotions and caught between joy and confusion, tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes. Earlier that day, she had connected with some fellow beachgoers, mothers who were there with their own children, now, seeking their support. She entrusted them with watching her grandchildren for a brief moment while she cautiously approached the mysterious couple, instructing her granddaughter Anna to keep an eye on Sebastian. Eleanor discreetly followed the couple at a safe distance, her heart pounding as she pondered whether the encounter was merely coincidental or something more mystifying. The couple eventually walked into a large house close to the beach and disappeared from view. Without a second thought, Eleanor promptly contacted the police for assistance and then rushed back to reunite with her grandchildren as they awaited the unfolding events together. 4 years prior to this bewildering beach encounter, another couple, Sylvia and Daniel, were relishing a peaceful moment in a secluded cabin in the woods. Daniel's twin brother, Alex, who had a tumultuous past and had just been released from a lengthy prison stint, was also present. Alex's rebellious actions and poor decisions had deeply saddened their mother, ultimately leading to her untimely demise from stress-induced heart complications. Consequently, their father, a wealthy businessman, decided to bequeath his entire fortune to Daniel. Daniel, in stark contrast to his brother, led an exemplary life, excelling academically and securing a prominent managerial role overseeing several agricultural fields in a village where he later met his beloved Sylvia. Initially, Sylvia had reservations about the relationship due to Alex's troubled history but eventually found love with Daniel, embracing their shared future, quickly ingratiated himself with the family, charming them with his charisma and tales of adventures. Despite his troubled past, Alex possessed a magnetic quality that was hard to ignore. His presence in the household began to stir tensions as he frequently undermined Daniel's decisions, suggesting alternative ways to manage the family's affairs. Daniel Asher had always been the epitome of a promising partner. His exceptional qualities not only made him an excellent match but also highlighted his potential for future success. From a young age, Daniel had shown great promise, managing multiple farms with a level of leadership and organizational skill that impressed everyone around him. His ability to handle such responsibilities from an early age signaled a bright future filled with achievements. At Sylvia's home, the atmosphere was tense. Her mother, despite her best efforts to provide her with wise counsel and a solid education, often found herself at odds with Sylvia. Independent and strong-willed, Sylvia frequently clashed with her mother, eager to escape the confines of parental control. Her rebellious spirit led her to often ignore her mother's advice. As she dreamed of a life free from the constraints imposed by her family, the moment Daniel laid eyes on Sylvia, he was captivated by her beauty and poise. Sylvia, with her slender figure and enchanting aura, left a profound impression on him. Although typically serious and reserved, Daniel felt an unusual pull towards her. He embarked on a mission to win her affection, engaging in romantic gestures such as inviting her to lunch, delivering flowers daily, composing poetry, and lavishing her with gifts. Daniel's consistent and chivalrous efforts eventually softened Sylvia's initial reservations. Sylvia's decision to marry Daniel, however, was not rooted in romance but in a strategic move for independence. She saw Daniel's ownership of a spacious apartment as the perfect escape from her mother's stringent rules. Their marriage, just a few months later, was a cause for celebration, particularly for Sylvia's mother, Mrs. Eleonora, who was thrilled. Believing her daughter had finally embraced maturity and responsibility, Daniel's likable and educated demeanor quickly won over his mother-in-law. Married life brought significant changes for Sylvia. She embraced a lavish lifestyle, wearing elegant dresses, socializing with an elite circle, and even upgrading to a larger home and a new car. Sylvia adapted seamlessly to her new role as Daniel's wife, displaying responsibility and earning respect within their social circle. The couple was blessed with 2 wonderful children, further enriching their lives. However, the tranquility of their domestic life was disrupted with the arrival of Daniel's brother, Alex, recently released from prison and informed of their father's passing and the ensuing inheritance. Alex arrived seeking his share, only to find out that Daniel was the sole heir. His unexpected visit and striking resemblance to Daniel, albeit with a more robust and charismatic demeanor, introduced a new dynamic to the family. Alex entered their home with a daring confidence that immediately caught Sylvia's attention. Possessing a bold and adventurous spirit, Alex swiftly charmed his way into captivating Sylvia. As they engaged in conversation, Sylvia found herself unexpectedly drawn to Alex's audacious charm, which stood in stark contrast to Daniel's more reserved demeanor. This unexpected encounter left Sylvia conflicted about her feelings. As she was mesmerized by the allure of Daniel's daring twin brother, caught in a moment of confusion, Sylvia found herself in the arms of her brother-in-law, temporarily forgetting that her husband was due to arrive home any minute. In a fleeting act of misplaced affection, she even served Alex the meal she had lovingly prepared for her husband. However, a sudden surge of guilt, possibly compounded by the fear of being discovered, stirred within her. Realizing her actions were misguided, she quickly decided to ask her brother-in-law to leave their home. Despite the chaos of the situation, Alex, the brother-in-law, experienced a change of heart about his initial intentions for visiting. His attention had entirely shifted towards Sylvia, whom he noted was remarkably attractive and youthful-looking, hardly appearing to be a mother of two. During another visit, Alex confessed his burgeoning obsession with Sylvia. He admitted to being captivated by her stunning eyes and lips, declaring her the woman of his dreams, yet he lamented that such a gem was wed to his brother, whom he considered undeserving. He expressed his discontent with the unfairness of the situation. While sipping a glass of wine, Sylvia rejected Alex's suggestion of leaving her husband, Daniel. She pointed out that she couldn't afford to lose the financial security provided by Daniel's inheritance, which included plans to purchase a grand mansion in the capital, thereby allowing them to leave their humble town. However, Alex's feelings were not rooted in love but rather an obsessive longing mixed with a desire for revenge against his brother, whom he blamed for his own life's misfortunes and for stealing their parents' affection. Driven by these dark motivations, Alex proposed a sinister plan to Sylvia, who shockingly agreed without a second thought for her children, under the pretense of celebrating their wedding anniversary. Sylvia lured Daniel to a secluded cabin by a lake in the forest, having arranged for the children to stay with their grandmother. Daniel was overjoyed at the prospect of spending peaceful time in nature with his wife, unaware of the grim fate that awaited him during their anniversary celebration. In his sinister turn of events, Sylvia meticulously crushed several sleeping pills, seamlessly blending them into Daniel's wine during their intimate evening. As the effects took hold and he slipped into unconsciousness, she urgently contacted Alex. He arrived promptly in a nondescript rental car. Together, they covertly transported Daniel's inert body to a nearby lake. There, they submerged him beneath the waters, meticulously crafting the scene to mimic an accidental drowning. As she participated in this macabre act, Sylvia was momentarily gripped by a sharp sense of regret. She realized the gravity of her actions. She was orchestrating the demise of not just her husband of over 7 years but also the father of her children. Yet, Alex, her accomplice and lover, swiftly overshadowed her fleeting remorse with his manipulative reassurance. His words, laden with dark promise, urged her forward. "Now, we are truly free, you and I," he whispered, his tone imbued with a chilling finality. The plot thickened as Alex retrieved the body of a woman from the trunk of his car, bearing an uncanny resemblance to Sylvia. This woman, a destitute alcoholic once romantically entangled with Alex, had been lured to the city under false pretenses of reconnecting. "I think I did her a big favor," Alex remarked coldly, revealing his callous manipulation. In a gruesome setup, Alex placed his own brother on a bed, positioning the homeless woman beside him as if they were a couple. The scene was then drenched in gasoline. Lighting a match, they set the room ablaze, staging a harrowing scene meant to be perceived as a tragic accident that claimed Daniel and his supposed wife. Meanwhile, Sylvia assumed the identity of the deceased woman. The deceptive duo then swiftly emptied Daniel's bank accounts, using the stolen funds to acquire a lavish seaside mansion, complete with a pool and breathtaking views, a stark contrast to their heinous acts. However, the gnawing grip of guilt began to unravel their facade. Overwhelmed by remorse, Sylvia found herself unable to face her children when law enforcement finally caught up with them. Her whispered apologies at the moment of her arrest were met with stony silence. The aftermath was poignant. Sylvia was ostracized by her mother and children, who, under the care of the grandmother, managed to salvage some of the money in the house. They moved in together, seeking solace and a fresh start away from the shadow of the past misdeeds. Sylvia and Alex, now imprisoned for life, confessed to their crimes, their story serving as a stark reminder of the catastrophic consequences of greed and deceit. This tragic tale underscores the sorrowful reality of how the pursuit of wealth and material gain can devastate families and corrupt the human soul. Miscommunication can have detrimental effects on relationships and even impact lives deeply. After listening to this tale, what are your impressions? We'd love to hear from you in the comments section below. Your insights are valuable to us. Now, prepare for another engaging story as we proceed to the next one. Rangel, a 92-year-old venerable individual, embarked on a routine journey to his local bank, aiming to withdraw funds for his essential medications. Upon his arrival, he was greeted by the usual hustle and bustle of the bank. bustling with other patrons and bank employees. Despite his advanced age and some physical limitations due to joint aches, Rangel was no stranger to managing his affairs independently. He joined the long queue, ready to patiently await his turn, steadfast in his belief that his age should not warrant any special treatment over others in line. When it was finally his turn, Rangel approached the counter where a cashier named Ruth was ready to assist. He courteously presented his withdrawal request along with a neat stack of documents for verification. Ruth began the routine check of the documents with diligence. Rangel, confident in his preparation, awaited the completion of the transaction. However, a snag occurred when it was discovered that his identification card had expired the previous week, an oversight Rangel hadn't noticed. This complication meant Ruth could not proceed with the withdrawal as the expired ID did not fulfill the bank's stringent requirements for proof of identity. Rangel, taken aback by this unforeseen hiccup, felt a wave of distress over the potential inability to purchase his medication. He implored Ruth to consider an exception or an alternative verification method that would allow him access to his funds. Despite Rangel's earnest pleas, Ruth, constrained by bank policies, stood firm on not processing the transaction, which escalated the tension. The situation reached a peak when Rangel was asked to leave the bank, a request that visibly upset him. At this critical juncture, a compassionate police officer who had been observing the interaction stepped in, recognizing the urgency of Rangel's need for his medication. The officer accompanied him back into the bank, advocating on his behalf. The officer's intervention sparked a crucial dialogue involving the bank manager. With consideration of Rangel's circumstances, they devised a provisional solution that allowed him to withdraw the necessary funds under the condition that he would provide an alternative form of identification within a specified timeframe. This resolution not only met Rangel's immediate financial needs but also underscored the vital role of understanding and adaptability in service industries. Particularly when dealing with elderly customers, the incident served as a poignant reminder of the challenges seniors may face and the collective responsibility of community members and institutions to support and assist them with dignity. The community surrounding Rangel was deeply moved by the extraordinary display of empathy and flexibility shown by a police officer and the bank staff under challenging conditions. When Rangel approached the bank teller, his voice tinged with desperation. He explained his urgent need to withdraw money to buy essential medication. Without it, he would face a restless, agonizing night as his medical condition worsened. He hoped for a display of compassion, but the response he received was unexpectedly harsh and cold. The teller, named Ruth, appeared to be having a difficult day herself, and unfortunately, she took out her frustrations on the elderly man. Rangel's mere presence seemed to exacerbate her irritability. His voice, the deep lines marking his face, seemed to only increase her annoyance. Ruth bluntly told him that she could not process his transaction because the bank's policy prohibited accepting expired cards. She didn't stop there. She scolded him for what she saw as negligence and laziness in his old age, implying that his failure to renew his card was due to a general lack of responsibility. Ruth mocked him by saying she had the capability to assist him but chose not to, wishing instead to teach him a lesson so he would remember to renew his card on time in the future. She told him to leave and renew his card if he wanted to access his funds, stressing that his continued presence was simply wasting both their time. She even went so far as to say that he didn't belong in such a reputable institution before dismissively turning him away. Stunned and wounded by her harsh words, Rangel tried to convey the urgency of his situation. The money was from his son, specifically intended for his medication. Not being able to access these funds would negate his son's efforts and the very purpose of the money. Ruth, unmoved, repeated that further discussion was pointless. She had provided her solution, and he was now just causing a disturbance. She pointed out that the amount he needed was minimal and accused him of disrupting her peace and interfering with her work over a trivial sum. Ruth stated that she needed to prioritize clients withdrawing larger sums. Before Rangel could respond, the situation escalated as she called security, falsely accusing him of aggressive and threatening behavior. Rangel was left dumbfounded and humiliated as he was escorted out, a poignant reminder of the critical importance of empathy and understanding in customer service, especially towards the elderly. This incident left a lasting impression on the community. highlighting the need for kindness and patience in all interactions, of showing gratitude and support. Acknowledging all the sacrifices his father had made for him over the years, however, on that particular day, a significant delay in the arrival of Amos' latest check had left Wrangel in a precarious financial situation, prompting his urgent need to access funds in his bank account. As Wrangel stood outside the bank, his emotions were a mix of frustration and vulnerability. The misunderstanding inside had escalated quickly. Wrangel had merely intended to explain his situation, hoping for some flexibility or assistance from the bank staff. Instead, his pleas had been misinterpreted as hostile, leading to the unfortunate scene of his forceful removal by the security team. He tried to articulate that he was not a threat, merely a long-standing customer in a temporary bind, but the chaos drowned out his explanations. Reflecting on his past affluence, Wrangel couldn't help but feel the sting of his current predicament more acutely. There was a time when he was well-respected, financially secure, and capable of indulging in life's luxuries with ease. He had been proud to provide for his family, ensuring his son, Amos, received an excellent education and that they lived a life many would envy. But those days seemed like a distant memory now, as life had taken an unexpected turn. The harsh realities of his financial mismanagement during his prime years were now evident. Wrangel had never been much of a planner, living in the moment and assuming the future would take care of itself. This oversight became glaringly apparent as he approached retirement with minimal savings and no investments to speak of. His hopes had once rested on his son's education and career, which, thankfully, had borne fruit. Amos had indeed flourished, landing a lucrative job that necessitated constant travel but brought financial stability. Amos, despite his frequent absences, remained a dutiful son. His financial contributions, coupled with Wrangel's modest pension, were meant to provide a cushion against hardship. Yet, the delay in Amos' latest check had exposed the fragility of Wrangel's situation. Alone, without immediate family nearby and now publicly humiliated at his local bank, Wrangel felt the weight of his isolation and financial dependency more than ever. Despite everything, Wrangel held on to a sliver of hope, knowing that this was just a temporary setback. Amos had always come through for him, and he was confident that this time would be no different. As he stood there, gathering his composure, Wrangel resolved to find a way to bridge these gaps in the future, perhaps seeking financial advice or exploring more reliable ways to manage his funds. The lessons were hard-earned, but Wrangel was determined not to let this incident define the twilight years of his life. Wrangel had been making a steady effort to repay his father for all the sacrifices made over the years. Initially, everything was going smoothly for Wrangel until he was diagnosed with arthritis. The condition brought him considerable discomfort in his bones and joints, though it was not chronic at the start, and he managed it well during the early years. The pain gradually intensified as time progressed. This made his already demanding life more difficult. Despite this, Wrangel was able to handle his daily routines and household duties with relative efficiency. However, his condition took a significant turn for the worse during the evenings. As night approached, his pain seemed to grow, especially when he tried to relax or sleep. Seeking relief, he consulted his doctor, who prescribed medication that was quite effective. By taking his medication about an hour before going to bed, Wrangel could secure a restful night's sleep. The medication not only eased the pain but also helped him fall asleep more easily, enabling him to manage his arthritis for several more years. Whenever he needed to refill his prescription, Amos, a dear friend or relative, would send him money to buy the necessary medication. Wrangel would then withdraw the money from his bank and go to the pharmacy to get his prescription. This routine had been serving him well until one unexpected day when everything took a drastic turn. Despite having sufficient funds in his account and everything seemingly in order for the withdrawal, an unforeseen complication arose. Ruth, who seemed to be a bank employee, inexplicably blocked his access to the funds. Standing outside the bank, a bewildered and humiliated Wrangel was at a loss as he faced Ruth's bureaucratic reasons for denying him access to his critically needed medication. The mere thought of facing a night without his medication sent a chilling shiver down his spine as he dreaded the prospect of enduring excruciating pain, driven by fear and urgency. Wrangel refused to leave the bank premises. He was aware that obtaining a new card that day was impossible since it was close to the end of business hours and it wouldn't be ready until the next day, a delay he simply couldn't afford. With resolute determination, he returned to the bank door and began to knock persistently, drawing the attention of both passers-by and bank staff. As security tried to escort him away from the entrance, he kept returning, resuming his knocking. His persistent actions eventually led to the police being called to the scene. Prompt assistance. The incident not only resolved Rangel's immediate financial dilemma but also underscored the compassionate nature of some law enforcement officers who, like Officer Josette, go beyond their call of duty to assist civilians in distress. Initially, it seemed an ordinary day for Officer Robert Jose, patrolling the vicinity of a local bank when the distress call was broadcast, given the location. His first thoughts leaned towards a potentially hazardous situation, perhaps even an armed robbery. However, upon arriving at the scene, the reality was far different and far less violent than he had anticipated. Instead, he was met with the sight of an elderly gentleman, Mr. Rangel, who was in a state of considerable distress but posed no threat. Mr. Rangel was standing outside the bank, his face etched with frustration and desperation. He had traveled there to withdraw funds urgently needed for his medication, but was confronted with unexpected barriers. The bank doors were locked, and despite his repeated pleas, the security personnel inside appeared indifferent, continuing their discussions and ignoring his appeals. Moved by the evident plight of the elderly man, Officer Jose approached to engage in a quieter, more personal interaction away from the cold exterior of the bank. They retreated to the comfort of the patrol car where Mr. Rangel relayed his story. He explained the unfortunate timing of his bank card expiring, a fact he had only learned during a recent call with a friend named Ruth. This revelation had led him on a frustrating journey through bureaucratic red tape, all in an effort to access his own money. As Mr. Rangel recounted his trials, his emotion was palpable. He even reached out to grasp Officer Jose's hands, beseeching him for help. He stressed the critical nature of the situation. Without his medication, his health was at risk. Officer Jose, empathetic yet cognizant of the bureaucratic necessities due to his background in law enforcement, made a choice guided by compassion rather than strict adherence to protocol. Together, they left the scene and made their way to the Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV. Despite Mr. Rangel's initial bewilderment at the officer's kindness, the urgency of their mission was clear. Arriving just as the DMV was nearing closing time, they were met with the typical last-minute crowd. However, the presence of Officer Jose, uniformed and assertive, seemed to convey the seriousness of their need, prompting the DMV staff to expedite Mr. Rangel's case, with efficiency that cut through the usual bureaucratic delays. They swiftly renewed his bank card. With the new card in hand, Officer Jose and Mr. Rangel returned to the bank. This time, the transaction proceeded without issue, a stark contrast to the earlier ordeal. The day's events not only highlighted the struggles faced by those dependent on medical and financial assistance but also showcased the profound impact that acts of kindness and understanding from individuals like Officer Jose can have on everyday lives. The kindness and understanding of Officer Josette, who looked beyond mere regulations to address the human necessities presented by the situation. As Rangel approached the security at the bank, they initially moved to remove him as they had several times prior. Their actions were halted when they noticed a police officer accompanying him, marking a pivotal shift in the scenario. This was the same officer who had previously escorted Rangel out of the building, but now he was facilitating his entry back into the bank. Together, they made their way to the counter where Ruth, the teller, was stationed. Filled with relief, Rangel hoped that with all his documents meticulously prepared and in impeccable order, this visit would result in a successful transaction. He made a point of reassuring Ruth that everything required was properly organized and submitted. However, Ruth seemed perturbed by the prompt reactivation of his card and responded to Rangel with a sneer. Despite having the chance to move past previous disagreements and proceed with the transaction smoothly, she clung to her grievances. She dismissively advised Rangel to return the following day, insisting that she had already shut down her station for the day and could not process any further transactions. Rangel was stunned by her response. He glanced at the clock, noting that the bank was still open for another 16 minutes. and pointed out that processing his withdrawal would take far less time than that. Ruth rolled her eyes, incredulously asking if he was attempting to tell her how to perform her job. She then told him to leave and firmly stated that he would not receive his money until the next day. Her loud tone caught the attention of other bank customers. At this moment, Officer Jose stepped in. He addressed Ruth firmly, stating that her manner of speaking to Rangel was inappropriate. He emphasized that Rangel was not making an unreasonable demand but merely requesting access to his own funds, to which he was rightfully entitled. Jose subtly mentioned that people around them were recording the incident, hinting that Ruth might not want to be captured on video treating an elderly client with disrespect. Realizing the seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of her actions, Ruth moderated her tone, with a reluctant smile that barely concealed her annoyance. She proceeded to process Rangel's withdrawal. It was evident to onlookers that she was displeased about having to comply with Rangel's request. As soon as Rangel had his money in hand, he and the officer left the bank. Outside, Rangel took a moment to express his profound gratitude to Officer Jose, acknowledging that without his intervention, the outcome might have been quite different. Rangel might not have been successful in retrieving his funds if it hadn't been for the timely intervention. Now, with the money finally in his possession, Rangel's immediate concern was a visit to the pharmacy to obtain his much-needed medication. Although initially hesitant, Rangel was persuaded by the persistent officer, who offered him a ride in the squad car to the nearby pharmacy. After some consideration, Rangel accepted the offer, and Officer Josset drove him there so he could secure the crucial medication. Holding the prescription in his hands, Rangel let out a deep sigh of relief. Thankful that his health would not be further jeopardized, in a final act of compassion, Officer Josset escorted Rangel back to his residence. Overcome with appreciation, Rangel expressed his profound gratitude to the officer. It seemed almost miraculous to Rangel that an officer, who had initially been called to potentially apprehend him, had instead extended such selfless support. This entire episode greatly reinforced Rangel's trust in the police service and filled him with a renewed sense of joy. Before parting ways, Officer Josset imparted some practical advice to the elderly gentleman, suggesting he maintain a sufficient stock of his medications to avert similar crises in the future, particularly given his financial constraints. With that, Officer Josset departed, disappearing into the twilight. That night, as Rangel slept soundly, the internet was abuzz with the day's events. Eyewitnesses who had observed the initial altercation between Rangel and Ruth, as well as those who had witnessed the unfolding events inside the bank, began posting videos and narrating their experiences online. They detailed how Ruth had been dismissive and unhelpful towards Rangel and highlighted how Officer Josset had intervened to not only assist him but also help him retrieve his money from the DMV. The online posts and videos quickly gained traction, portraying Officer Josset as a hero of the day. The public was deeply moved by his decision to assist Rangel instead of pursuing an arrest, sparking a widespread desire for more empathetic officers within the police force. The story garnered extensive media attention, with local TV stations and blogs picking it up. Both Josset and Rangel were invited for interviews, further amplifying their popularity. Unfortunately for Ruth, the widespread sharing of the story had a detrimental effect on her professional reputation. Many bank customers voiced their displeasure at her behavior and pledged to boycott the bank as long as she remained an employee. Faced with escalating public backlash, the bank made the decision to terminate her employment. Ruth deeply regretted her harsh treatment towards Rangel, realizing that had she acted more compassionately, she might still have been employed. Officer Rangel and the community were extremely satisfied with the recent developments. The officer, in particular, was elated to be acknowledged for his noble and altruistic behavior, which further solidified his dedication to serving the community with compassion and understanding. Officer Rangel consistently aimed to embody the ideal of a friendly neighborhood policeman, ensuring he was a reliable pillar the community could lean on at all times. His story is a beacon of inspiration. Reflecting on Officer Rangel's actions, it prompts us to consider what we might have done in his position. What steps would you have taken if you were in Officer Rangel's shoes? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Also, remember to click the like and subscribe buttons to keep up to date with our latest videos. See you in the next video.